Now, political podcasts are becoming increasingly popular. More and more of us tuning in to catch the latest news and analysis from Westminster, with lots of big names also getting in on the action.
Here's one for you, the former Conservative leader, William Hague, who's just started hosting the Times podcast, The Story. In the first episode, he's been talking to the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. Here it is.
It's been a very hard time to be leader of the party.
I think someone described it as the worst hospital pass for any incoming Prime Minister in however many decades. And clearly it's been there's lots of frustrations. We've been through a lot as a country over the past few years, which people are understandably frustrated about. It makes the environment trickier. But I'm entirely confident that there are better times ahead. And in spite of the challenges that the country's been through, whether that's COVID, the pandemic, the impact of that on everyone, and just as we were recovering from that, to get hit by a war in Ukraine and the impact on energy bills, that's a tough few years for the country. But actually, I'm sure we'll get onto it, but I feel that this year things are turning a corner, and we're not through it yet, but all the things that I've been working hard on for the last year, I think you can start to see are making a difference. That change is starting to become more apparent in people's lives.
Lord William Hague joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning.
Podcasting. So if someone told you, I don't know, when you were party leader, what year was that?
That finished in 2001, so nobody would have dreamt of a podcast.
No, I think around then you were on Desert Island Disc, and I was listening to it the other day, because it's now in podcast form as well.
Yeah.
That you would be on a podcast, and if someone had described what a podcast was then, would you think they would be as popular as they're becoming?
No, we couldn't have anticipated that, could we? And we still used to do. I used to do the long interview with John Humphreys, a great BBC
former Today
interviewer,
programme,
or on a programme like On the Record that was on a Sunday lunchtime, and we did a 40-minute interview, and that was tough going if you were the politician. But it was a long-form interview where people could really see what you were like, what was really making you tick. And I think podcasts have partly taken over from that, because some people want to see, you can only talk for a few minutes to somebody, even on a great show like this. But a podcast, you've got 3/4 of an hour. It's like having a coffee with somebody. It's like being in the pub with them. You can make up your mind about them.
Yeah, what was always demanded of those who would interview someone like you when you were party leader was that you got a story or you got an answer to a question, and it wasn't necessarily as pally, whereas podcasts can be. Like, with this interview with Rishi Sunak, what did you think? What did you learn from the interviews you'd done where you'd been kind of put in the spotlight, knowing that you were on that side now? Because it's all very well you interviewing another leader of the Conservative Party, but you are a Conservative.
Yes.
So, what am I going to get out of that from someone like you?
Well, that's exactly right. It's not the same. It's not as challenging for that person. It is more conversational. Although, by the way, I would like to do on this series of podcasts the leader of the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats.
Do you think it'll happen?
And I don't see any reason why not. And I was on the BBC podcast that Nick Robinson does, Political Thinking, a few weeks ago with Tony Blair. And yes, that's not as confrontational as you were describing those interviews in the past. But then people write in and say, well, that was refreshing because we actually saw you having a rational discussion, more like normal people would have, and thinking about some of the very complicated things in the world today. So what do you get from that, from what I did with Rishi yesterday? Well, you get to see him as a person more than you will on a normal day-to-day basis, talking about his children, talking about his grandparents and how proud he is of that. And you get a sense of whether he really is optimistic and really is confident about the election, because you get to see him talk about that at reasonable length. So I think you still learn things from these podcasts.
But do you ask the tough questions? I mean, because there are some really big issues facing the country right now. One of them is clearly whether there will be a general election. Did you ask him whether he thinks he will be Prime Minister by the end of the year?
Oh, yeah, I put it to him that one of the great experts this week has said there's a 99% chance. Now, we might not all agree with it. I'm not sure I agree with that, but the 99% chance of Labour forming the next government. And what does he think about that? How is he going to make the 1% bigger? And so it wasn't totally a cosy chat. I also asked him about the financial position of young people in their 20s and 30s, Now, most of them aren't able to own their own property like people often did in their 20s and 30s
Just on those
before.
just on those 2 points. So there is an issue with Rishi Sunak that many have, that one, many in his own party don't believe he will be Prime Minister by the end of this year. And two, when you talk about the cost of living, the idea that Rishi Sunak has no idea about what it's like to struggle with a cost of living crisis. Did he recognise those two things? And do you think he'll be Prime Minister?
Yes, actually, I was talking to him again on the podcast. So I was talking to him on the podcast about how is he going to relate to people who will see that he's remote or he's not short of money or exactly those things. And although I know, and this is the other side of a podcast, it is more conversational because I know him from Yorkshire. He succeeded me as the MP for Richmond, Yorkshire. I know how well he does relate to people and the huge interest he takes in individuals and families and households. So I was trying to get him to talk about that and to convey that. And again, people can make up their minds about these things if they watch somebody on a podcast. It's one of the means of communication now.
So you say you don't agree with those polls and those surveys that say there's a 99% chance he won't be Prime Minister. What do you think? Will he still be in number 10 by the end of the year?
Well, I think he can be. I think nobody's cast a vote yet in the election, and the mood, as I see it, is people are pretty fed up with all political parties. Many, many people don't know how they will vote in an election. They certainly don't want it to be taken for granted how they're going to vote in the general election. So the Labour Party are definitely the favourites. It would be silly to deny that for the election coming up. But there's still a very wide range of outcomes. And, there's a 20-point poll lead for Labour. But think of if you can remember the election of 2017 when Theresa May called the election. She started with a 20-point poll lead and won by 2% in the end. It was a really narrow squeak in the end. So that's all to come. It's still the election. There's still a lot to play for in the general election.
But I wonder when it comes to podcasts as well, we're so often told, aren't we, that everyone's bored of politics, that it's too polarised. It's about party politics. It's not about country. It's about infighting. It's about power and vested interest. Why would someone then choose to listen to a podcast that's about more of this? Why are political podcasts increasingly popular?
I think it's a different angle on that because, first of all, it is more conversational. It's more like normal conversation than the soundbite or the tweet, or that is such a simplified thing. I think also people know the world is becoming more complicated. There's climate change, there's artificial intelligence, there's two major wars going on at the moment, as well as all our domestic politics. So that can't be reduced to just simple slogans. So they like to hear the discussion. So I think it's all of those things. And also, people like to listen to something. They're on a train journey, they're lying in the bath for half an hour or whatever, and they like to have something they can listen to.
You're listening to you in the bath?
Well, wherever they may be.
Where do you listen to your podcasts? Where are you when you listen to
In the gym.
In the gym.
A much more active version.
I've got to ask, do you look... Rishi Sunak saying he had a hospital pass from Liz Truss when he became Prime Minister of the economy. He wanted the job anyway, didn't he? So tough. What he is facing is a party full of infighting. Every week we are reporting one either cabinet minister or someone pretty high up in the ranks saying we should have so-and-so's leader or this is going on. This hasn't changed since you were party leader. Why is the Conservative Party so disunited?
Well, I think it's only part of it at the moment, but it is a big problem.
It's a massive part
It's a big problem with that part of it, and I've written about how they really have to sort that out because
you could have 5 leaders.
Otherwise, they will go into opposition for a long time.
But it's also the fact that it's a party that doesn't seem to be... When it's not united, 5 leaders it could potentially have in a short period of time, not since the 1700s or something like that.
Yes.
That is not a party that knows what it's about and that should be trusted.
That's done huge damage to the Conservative Party. But then you also have to think, well, an election is a choice about the future. It's one of the things we discussed on the podcast again. So what would Rishi Sunak achieve in the future if he had his own mandate, if he had his own election victory? But you are quite right, that is a huge problem for the Conservative Party.
Do you have conversations about that
it's not
now with people in the party? Do you just say, look, we're doing it again?
Yes, I do, and I've spoken to some of the ministers who've resigned and said, really, you should not be deserting things. at this point, because unless you all go in the same direction, you're not going to get anywhere at all. You're not going to survive at all. By the way, it's not just Conservatives. Remember, the Labour Party has been through the whole Corbyn
it's easier to talk
period
to you about the
where they were trying
Conservatives.
to overthrow him and he was hanging on, and then they had their huge election defeat. So this is not just Conservatives, but certainly Conservatives have had that with these series of changes of Prime Minister, and that's been a huge problem for Rishi Sunak. So this, I think, a very able man has, of course, been hampered by that legacy of the last few years.
William Hague, joy having you on the sofa. Enjoy the podcasting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming in.